So I have filmed a post for Guild Wars and for Final Fantasy, and we're going to be talking about the same thing, but in a different way of thinking about it. We're going to talk in World of Warcraft terms what happens when you've hit max level and you are getting into the rest of the game. Everything is not Shadowlands. Maybe you're leveling an alt. Maybe you want to go and get some cool mount that you've seen. Maybe like what's going on in the background here, I'm playing all the things random and you're just going and doing things. How does the game work? Most specifically within the term syncing, scaling, and so on. Guild Wars kind of just ignores the problem. That has a lot of pros. Because effectively, imagine if they never had to deal with the level squish in the first place because we'd always stayed level 60. And so, when we went into the Burning Crusade, everybody just stayed level 60, and into Lich King, and into Cataclysm, and all the way up to Shadowlands. It fixes a lot of things, but the downside is, why would we be raiding Mythic if the gear from Molten Core was still applicable? So, there are downsides to that system. WoW has done a great job always keeping you focused on the newest, shiniest thing, but at the cost of a lot of their legacy content. Now, they don't make you do the legacy content, so you don't feel like you're 15 years behind, and that's a problem that Final Fantasy is going to have, where they have done a great job preserving really significant portions of their past, while also giving you something new to chase. They have also made it harder and harder for new players to get in because you must play through the story, very similar to Shadowlands, where you have to play through those shield-based campaign quests, which are iterations on kind of the war campaign style quests that we had in BFA, which there was kind of a campaign to Legion. There were like these scenarios in Warlords of Draenor. There's been this kind of iterative steps of trying to tell a better and better story. I think Lich King kind of had like aspects of that they were trying, but they kind of shied back away from it. So there are a lot of people that don't consider World of Warcraft to even have a narrative, but there are also a lot of WoW lore nerd fans that are like, what are you talking about? I love the story, but a lot of it is tied between not being in game and things like that, and new players especially that are going through some form of chromie time or something like that are just lost. I mean, as a Horde player, who is my War Chief? My God. And so from Final Fantasy's standpoint, gearing would have to be simplified drastically in World of Warcraft. You would have to stop having 27 trinkets where I was a hunter in the Burning Crusade and I was running Gruul every single week sitting on a pile of DKP, and I never even saw the DST drop. So there was just no chance, the Dragonspine trophy, so I never had a chance to even bid on it, much less acquire it. And that's very, very frustrating from a loot standpoint. What then happens is World of Warcraft over the years has added things like time walking, where they say, you know what, it would be cool if we went back and leveraged old content. And I think through things like Loot Appraiser Challenge, all the things, these various add-ons, people have found ways to engage in this content, but that is a separate community. It almost feels like a separate game than staying in Shadowlands and staying up on your dailies and doing your weekly clears. And so, where I think World of Warcraft kind of fits into this is, of the three, in a Final Fantasy world, you would basically be allowed to skip all of its early expansions. But in trade for that, the old raids or whatever I'm about to run here, because I'm in all the things random, wouldn't really matter. It just wouldn't. And you end up kind of wondering why you do it. And so if you think about the fact that I'm in Panda Land right now, and I would love to leverage that content more, I would say that we could go back and you could imagine building what Final Fantasy calls ultimates. Imagine if you could go back into Lich King and there was a fight where you fought, Yogg Saron and I don't know, something else from Ulduar or whatever, something from Champions, and then you went and you fought the Lich King and you had to fight him back to back, and if you wipe, you have to go back to the beginning of the fight. No trash. Ideally you just go straight into the fight, and you fight those all back to back. And all it gave you was a transmog, kind of like the Panda Land challenge modes or the Mage Tower from Legion. It's just an achievement. There's no power progression behind it. Imagine if the power progression every tier basically stopped at the heroic level, and your highest level content was cosmetic only. It would be a lot easier for players to be like, yeah, we just get our heroic clears every week. It's not a big deal. And we're done. Imagine if your daily progression for your legendaries were always a slightly inferior weapon to the best raid drop for the vast majority of an expansion. What that would result in is people going out and doing the maw and stuff would be the casual players who don't want to raid so that they could have the next best thing. Or people that want to do both. But it would feel much more like choose casual, lots of time, or high skill, lots of raid progression. And either way, you're looking at one of the best weapons in the game. Different appearances, different experiences. Same game. So in Final Fantasy terms, that's how the in-game content would skew. And so when you talk about scaling, their synced content is in order to preserve those grinds for people that miss out. I want to go back and do Mage Tower. I want to go back and do a lot of these things. And the world sync system, time walking as it currently sits, is just not as powerful as the synced and minimum item level settings in Final Fantasy. It's just not there yet. It could get there. They absolutely have the ability to do it, but the progression system in World of Warcraft right now basically neuters a lot of old content, and it focuses on in-game. Now, in Guild Wars, on the other hand, you would actually still want to go do those things. You still might want Dragonspine Trophy. So for anybody that's played Magic the Gathering, there is a version of Magic the Gathering, a card-based game, where you're allowed to play with cards across any number of decks. And so there would be this whole loot chasing. And so I think, WoW's Twink system, like where you've seen people kind of get into Twink lobbies in PvP, and that's been handled differently over the years, kind of most mimics that, where you're chasing specific things, except they've once again simplified the loot system down. So once you have a legendary, their actual loot system functions much closer to something like the heirloom system, where once you have legendaries, you're kind of all set. So I think in general, this conversation mostly just shows me that World of Warcraft is very, very good at driving people into current content. And if they like that content, the game is rejoiced. And if they don't like that content, the game is hated. And ultimately, this conversation, when talking about the other two games, has really just shown me that Final Fantasy does allow me to focus on old content and get something from it. Guild Wars 2 does allow me to focus on old expansions and get something out of it. World of Warcraft without add-ons, I think, shows me how good they are at focusing on current patch content when compared to the other games. But their world sync system is a symptom and a sign that shows me how, in trade for that incredible perk, how bad they are at legacy systems. That really shows when there's a huge gap between patch content or when patch content is not well received. But it also means that there is never an expansion launch that is more exciting to be a part of day and date, whether you are on the content creation side of things or the players, than World of Warcraft. There is never a better game to be in for the first day, the first week, the first month of those three games than World of Warcraft. In Final Fantasy, everybody's too worried about spoilers, and so there's this weird thing where we're all playing but nobody's talking about it. In Guild Wars, you can level all the way to max on your previous build from your previous expansion and not get anything that really feels like an upgrade. And so World of Warcraft has the best expansions. They're awesome. And I look forward to Dragonflight. I don't think it'll be ready until 2023. It sounds like they're going to try to launch it in 2022, and I'm incredibly nervous about that. But either way, I will likely enjoy the launch. I have yet to play a World of Warcraft expansion that I did not enjoy the launch, and I played in every single expansion with the exception of Warlords of Draenor. That doesn't mean I've liked all of those expansions, but the launches are incredible. And I think that's because they do such a good job focusing on the act of getting to cap and the act of being at cap with everybody else in the newest content. What I would like to see is, without losing that, I would like to see them find a way to also say, in the in-between times, or if the current patch does not interest you, how do we also make the old content feel better? Because Guild Wars does so by saying old content and new content are relatively equal in WoW terms. Final Fantasy does so by saying the old content is still mandatory, and so therefore there's enough people that still need it that it also reminds us of how fun certain content is. So the best moments, the Mage Tower moments, shine. The 8.3 Auction House launch, those get forgotten. not by the whole community. Raubon Extreme is a phrase that refers to a moment like that. But the cherished moments, when people talk about their very favorite raids, when people talk about their very favorite dungeons, their favorite moments in PvP, the moments that have made Classic, the nostalgic parts of Classic, really, really fun, are these incredible key moments, and it keeps those there in a preserved state. That preserved state is not cryogenic, it's not flawless, but it does a substantially better job than Chromie Time, World Sync, or Time Walking. And so I hope that those systems could improve and grow. I think Exile's Reach was an incredible step in the right direction to acknowledging the gaps they have in the new player experience. I would love to see them continue to go back and leverage old content. It feels weird to think of what the lore ramifications of Shadowlands are and see Shadowlands launch without archaeology. To see this expansion not be something that reflects backward a lot better. This game probably has the single largest library of legacy content of any game, maybe in the world, but definitely of those three, or probably the whole genre. Total backlog hours in this game, it is enormous. It is hard to think of a game that is larger, and it just is. And yet the vast majority of it doesn't matter. Certain parts of it aren't even repeatable. They're just gone. Pre-patch events, gone. Mage Tower, gone. And so I would love to see them build on it, because if you could have a semi-relevant legacy content and a current expansion content that is being regularly updated and loved on, whether or not it's your thing, I think you would have an amount of content where you would have a diverse and robust community of people who were all getting something different about it. And at that point, it would be comparable to a platform, something like Minecraft, where you have a modded experience that is drastically different than the vanilla experience. And within the modded experience, it's wildly different. When you go out into the community and you go hang out with somebody like Hazel, and you become passionate about pets, and then you tab over and you watch a transmog competition on Asmongold's stream, and then you pop over into some of the gold makers. Like, I really like lurking in places like Persephone's stream, and you're watching a Loot Appraiser challenge, and then you're off to the Race for World First, and you're watching Limit or Echo duke it out. This game is that diverse. What it needs, when I think about the act of syncing, the act of scaling and looking backward, is it needs a way to allow those other communities, the speedrunners, speed druids, the transmog collectors, the pet battlers, the lore masters. It needs a way for that to feel more relevant, because Final Fantasy does a great job leveraging what it can, but it doesn't have what World of Warcraft has. It doesn't have nearly the number of encounters. It doesn't have nearly the number of expansions. You look at Guild Wars. My God, Guild Wars doesn't even have like the number of base patches to an expansion. They get one. It is not uncommon. Their patches are called living seasons. They work a little bit different because their pay model is different. But when you look at Warlords of Draenor or Shadowlands and you say, man, those are really underpatched expansions, that's run of the mill for Guild Wars. Guild Wars skipped an expansion. They went like 5 years between two of them. And yet there are still people to this day running Heart of Thorns content, Path of Fire content, which is like hearing, there's a group getting together to run Lich King this week. Time Walking just doesn't do a good enough job. It could do better. And so I am really excited to kind of compare these games more directly, more often. I think World of Warcraft has the strongest portfolio of the three as far as total robust content. And anything that the other games are doing better when you talk about quantity of content is simply because World of Warcraft is choosing not to use part of the incredible history that they have brought to bear. Kinda.